And now, ladies and gentlemen, as Compere, it's my pleasant task to introduce our chief guest this evening. A personality holds a PhD and a master's degree in economics from the Australian National University and a BSc degree from the University of Kelaniya. He served at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for nearly 30 years in different capacities, including chief economist, director of economic research, assistant governor, deputy governor, and senior deputy governor. He also served as an alternative executive director for India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Bhutan at the International Monetary Fund. After retirement from the Central Bank in January 2021, he worked as an independent consultant for economic and financial matters for multilateral agencies and global investment firms prior to assuming duties as the 17th governor of the Central Bank in April 2022. He has been rated at the highest by Global Finance magazine recently based on inflation control, economic growth goals, currency stability, and interest rate management. Without further ado, with much respect, I invite our chief guest, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, to address you all.
Good evening, CEOs, organizers, my friend Andrea, and all the key organizers here. First of all, let me thank organizers for inviting me to this forum. I was wondering, this is a private sector CEOs forum, and what should someone like me, the public officer, come and tell you? I think that's a bit of a, when I listened to some of the talks that I heard, I have to admit this is mainly the Global CEOs Forum is mainly for the CEOs of the private sector, I guess. That's where more about how to do business, how to promote, get to investment, expand your businesses, how to make profits, all these things. And how to run your businesses, how to access markets, all are completely private sector business. I should say I am not an expert on that. As a public officer, all I can do is just to share what I thought is a role of the public sector and the role of the private sector in basically coming out of this crisis and taking the country forward to a better kind of outcome after this crisis. So first of all, I must congratulate the CEOs Forum, this initiative, because it's quite, in my view, it's timely and important because we are kind of at a crossroad in terms of the direction of travel as an economy, as a country. If we thought about if you're going to have this forum a year ago, obviously that would be, I don't think anyone would imagine you could have this kind of forum, because I can remember those days I had a lot of interactions with CEOs of the private sector. It's all about coming to me, coming to the bank and asking how to find foreign exchange, for them to import, how the exporters coming and asking how to get the operations operational properly without disturbance on the power cuts, all these issues. I think I can remember those days. I can see a clear difference. I don't see many meetings and visitors from the private sector now. That's a good part. So that I see that they are getting on back to their normal businesses. And although I don't say this is best environment and facility, occasion for the business, but still there's a clear change. And I'm happy to see that, not having a lot of requests from this government central bank or our officers asking for, relief, support, everything, and they are getting back to normal business. I think that's a good development. This is why I say it's good time, timely, because now there's a long way to go. So these are the forums that will help you to exchange your ideas, you know, the new innovations, how to get on the business, how to market access, all these things that I'm sure there have been, how to bring in new technology. I think this is a good timing that you are having this kind of forums. I must appreciate the efforts, especially we need to continue this kind of this thing. But I see myself as also CEO, but not a private sector, a public sector institution. CEO of public sector is, I think, a different role, especially as a CEO of a public policy institution. I think I don't have to bother about my orders coming up, how to pay salaries, all these people, but it's a different kind of challenges in different environment and different objectives, different responsibilities. I think that's where I think I can't make a contribution to your objectives, but I think that's why I thought I'll talk about the role of the public institution, public sector, and the role of the private sector, how we can go together to come out of this situation. I think in my view, I mean this is, and also before that I just first want to ask you something also related. Today is a historic day in terms of things that we have been doing. I must announce that first one is that after several years of efforts, we got this legislation governing the central bank, which was only a Monroe Act, and we got the Central Bank Act, new legislation, new act governing central bank, giving more independence, accountability, obviously was enacted. And today we had the first governing board meeting. That first day of the governing board meeting, we took also important decision in that meeting. First day of the first governing board that I chaired with all new members. That's a historic day. And also in that meeting, we were able to fully complete what we call domestic debt optimization strategy and completed the debt exchange. Even for the last lap of the domestic debt optimization is to convert treasury bills of almost close to 3 trillion held by the central bank, converted into longer term treasury bonds. That was also completed today, settlement happening tonight. From tomorrow onwards, government will get the full relief out of domestic debt optimization. That is an important milestone in this process of recovering and addressing the crisis that we are going through. Partly, first crisis that I mentioned is a sovereign debt crisis. It's not private sector debt crisis, not the private firms, but the debt crisis of the sovereign debt. That's how the first one. In that process, first part, from our part, domestic debt optimization now fully completed today. And then, obviously, as Deputy Ambassador mentioned, next part is to complete the external debt restructuring to restore what we call the sovereign debt sustainability, which is most important part for everyone, all of you to get your normal activities and for you to be able to do business. Without sovereign debt sustainability, I don't think we can address all the situations. That's why it's important, the historic day today in terms of that process. And then why that is important in this process is that because now when you think about the crisis we had, one is a sovereign debt crisis, government debt crisis. Another one is the balance of payment crisis, lack of foreign exchange earnings by the country as a whole, mainly that is the private sector, foreign exchange earnings. That's two parts. But there's a root cause of this whole crisis is basically government sovereign debt crisis, basically, build up over a period of time with very high fiscal expansion, lack of fiscal discipline, then led to higher debt. And obviously, that's why it's important to discuss about the role of private sector and public sector. Why we came into this situation is that there was a confusion between the role of the private sector and public sector in the development of a country, where the government, public sector, has been engaging in a lot of businesses activities that private sector is supposed to do in the past. For example, the historical, even now, a long period of time. So, for example, the supply of electricity, supply of water, supply of petroleum, even the insurance, banking, a lot of other services, and even ports, airports, all the airlines, almost major share has been the private government sector, has been providing those services. Those are basically better and more efficiently with these objectives, clear objectives, private sector should have been doing. But when the public sector is engaging this kind of mix, confused role, on one hand they are doing business, on the other hand public sector is supposed to provide the enabling environment for the private sector to conduct their business in a much more efficient and open and competitive basis. There is a conflict of interest when public sector as a regulator, facilitator, also engaging in part of doing business, obviously there is a conflict. We see that all the sectors, even sectors, our regulation can see banking sector. We have large share of state banks. As the owner of government has a big shareholding. And there is a nexus between the banks and the state-owned enterprises where the two state banks are exposed to the businesses conducted by the government-owned enterprises like ICICI Board, Sri Lankan Airlines, CPC. And there's a conflict, and there's exposures, and there's an influence, so that is not the best model to work. Unless you have a proper regulations, proper supervision, proper legal structures, those are not going to work. That's what we have seen in this country, where this public service delivery on commercial basis, government is trying to do that. That has always been a failure in a lot of areas other than, obviously government has a responsibility to provide health, education, social safety nets, other essential services, provide support infrastructure, provide, facilitate business environment, reduce the barriers, address the rigidities in the land markets, address rigidities in the labor market, so that people, private sector can do that business going forward. So we have failed, in our model, we have failed that. And that's how, for a period of time, government has been trying to engage in the business, build up huge debt without having a proper returns because those are inefficient operations. Now we ended up in debt crisis. So now this going forward, this is why we are trying to address that part. But addressing the restructuring debts, government debt obligations would not itself solve the problem unless you address the root cause of that thing, is that government is trying to engage the activities that government should not be engaging. That's a key lesson going forward. There's obviously, I don't think government has any space going forward after the restructuring. People who gave us credit, who gave loans and credit to the government would certainly will not be doing it again if we do the same thing again. That's why going forward this has to be changed for us to sustain. That's why I think going forward, that's why I think this forum is important. There will be a lot of opportunities. Government will be gradually moving away from this, and government should be able to open up opportunity space for the private sector to come and participate in a more competitive, open and transparent basis. And this is where the private sector role going forward, there will be a much bigger role going forward. I can assure you, government is no longer, if we continue to do that kind of business, we will end up in another crisis, a sovereign debt crisis. So government can't afford to do that. This is where the recent reforms of the cost recovery pricing and no subsidies to the state-owned enterprises if they make losses. They have to adjust their prices, so make it so more efficient, provide the public service delivery, otherwise open up the competition, and then you all, private sector can come and compete with the private sector, government sector, and government sector gradually need to at least compete on a level playing field. in every sector, banking sector, the electricity, utility area, even the port services related, that ports and all operations will have to be on that basis. Government should only be focusing on this, addressing and supporting the environment, as Japanese Deputy Ambassador mentioned, is about the making environment to do business better. Cutting down the regulatory barriers and cutting down the times that you need to spend. For example, now we all know that the lot of time, resources you spend a lot of time and resources to deal with Inland Revenue Department, deal with the customs, deal with the ports, deal with the customs, and deal with other approvals, going after public officers to get the public service. Even at the lowest level, small business, when go to the local council and get their services, it's not that easy. Your resources are allocated, and that's why our businesses are less competitive compared to a lot of other markets, because your cost is basically mainly because of the difficulty in doing your business. I think that is the main role the government should be focusing on going forward, so that will make the key thing that was mentioned is cost competitiveness is the bottom line of any business. And also other part, the government responsibility is to, that's one part of government role, bring down the role of the government, bring down the burden of the government, get less involvement in the business activities, and do the facilitation role, and then government resources can be diverted to more towards health, education, necessary public services. Government has responsibility to do that. With that, I think there will be a better environment, more social safety net, looking after poor and vulnerable, and make the people who earn more to pay taxes and have proper systems in place. That's one part. And the other part is the what they call balance of payment price that we have been going through. That is also related to the fiscal deficit, what we call trend deficit story. When the government is trying high fiscal deficits, that will translate into high current account deficits and low reserves, and the high kind of volatility in the exchange rates and volatility in the interest rates. Those are the outcomes of those policies. And then obviously the institution like us, the central bank, and the government has a role to manage and maintain a stable macroeconomic environment so that you have a predictable, consistent policies going forward and clearly open and transparent basis. I think and also because of the balance of payments, what we have in long time is that even as a private sector, if you look at our Sri Lankan private sector focus on the business is mainly the domestic oriented businesses as a share of GDP. For example, we are saying 20 years ago export to GDP was 30-35%, now come down to 15%, which means economy has expanded, but not more towards export orientation, more competitive to global businesses, less competitive globally, but with protections and coverage, businesses were basically more towards the local businesses, domestic areas, where those can survive only as long as there is a protection. There are some public services, government is also engaging in certain businesses. As a result, less competitive and less earning of foreign exchange, more spending foreign exchange as a country is not sustainable. That is the second part of this reform, is to convert this what they call import-dependent economy into export-oriented economy. So that is the next transition that needs to happen. For that to happen, there's a role for the government and the central bank where we need to maintain, as already mentioned, the competitive exchange rate. So that's where I think just mentioned export exchange rate depreciation help to make this export sector a little more competitive than in the past. So at our right balance, obviously, country is still importing more than exporting. We have to look after every sides of the impacts, but still we need to move towards a much more competitive kind of environment where we have a real effective competitive exchange rate that will encourage people to earn more foreign exchange. Second part, for them to earn or supply your products and services on a more competitive basis to global markets. It's about global CEO, not a local CEO forum. It's a global CEO forum. You look at how you can take your businesses globally. So for them to be able to take business globally, you should be competitive globally. Our problem that we had in the largely private sector historically is coming to the government and lobbying and pushing and asking the government, please protect my sector from high import duties and give us protection. We can compete only locally but not globally. That has to be changed. If we are to, so this is where government response is to open up, facilitate our people to businesses to access global markets. It is not a necessary, it's not sufficient. It's necessary if we need to negotiate with other markets, have more access to Japan, Europe, or India, or whatever emerging markets. We need to open up our businesses to the global competition. But when you open up, obviously there's a challenge. If you're not competitive globally, then you can't survive. That is where you need to have this innovation technology, and government role is to facilitate, but yourself, this forum is all about how to be globally competitive. This global CEO forum should be looking at how you can be globally competitive, not that how you can be locally competitive by asking, increase the duty of this product so that we can sell more. Increase duty of this motor vehicle so that we can sell more locally, but you can't sell anything beyond Sri Lanka. That has to be changed. That is where I think from the private sector point of view, while recognizing the role of the government, private sector, I think I know a lot of business leaders are looking at what are the products, how they can be competitive, even both locally and globally. If you are competitive locally without any protection, and if you open up, exposed to the global markets, you should automatically will be competitive globally. If you are competing only locally and not globally, once open markets are open, you will collapse. That is where the going forward, and for the country to sustain, for the private sector business to sustain. That is why every successful model that we are seeing, talk about Vietnam, Bangladesh, earlier Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, even China, Japan, that's how those countries have progressed. Without that transition, without that transformation and thinking by the private sector, I don't think basically we can make a significant sustainable progress going forward. This is, I think, two parts. I think this I'll stop here. First part is the role of public sector, and I see our facilitation role by the public sector, and the role of the government's private sector is to make use of the opportunities and be competitive and be ready to compete and ready to open up markets, and then use all the technology, new innovations to be competitive as a global player, not a local player. Thank you very much.